Hi, and welcome to our webinar on actions with Ftrack. For those who don't know, I am Vitaly Kobyshev, Ftrack's regional manager for EMEA. We're very excited to talk to you about how you can build custom processes within Ftrack Studio. Today, we're going to run through how you can automate repetitive tasks, generate reports, edit metadata, batch import-export, and much more. But before we jump into the webinar, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague who will be actually running the webinar, Matthias Sierbergs, our sales engineer based in Stockholm. We expect the webinar to last about 45 minutes. Please do use the Q&A panel at any time. And any questions that we don't answer for text, we'll try to get through at the end. And if we don't have time for your question, then we will follow up in an email. Over to you, Matthias.
Thanks so much, Vitaly. And hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on how to get started with actions in Ftrack Studio. My name is Matthias, and I'm a sales engineer at Ftrack based at the headquarters in Stockholm, Sweden, as Vitaly mentioned. Before we kick this session off, today I would like to give a brief background of myself. I've been with Ftrack for many years, since the early days. I've been in many positions during this time, from being a developer to working with support and sales, and today I'm representing the professional services team at Ftrack, doing all sorts of technical implementations and consultancy for customers of all sizes, I would say. That's something I will get back to at the end of the webinar. Yeah, I think that's it. So with this background and introduction out of the way, let's get started what we will discuss today. It will mostly be about this little icon, actually, or not, of course, this icon itself, but what is being represented by this icon, or what it represents, basically, what it is associated with in the web interface. You'll find it across the web interface in many different places, from the different context menus and the side panel, for example, in the overview section, and so on. I'll get back to that in a short while. So what is actions, and what do you need to create an action? Actions enables the studio to extend the functionality of Ftrack Studio via custom processes. I mean, all creative studios are different. There's simply no one-size-fits-all project management solution out there that can cover the needs of all. So actions try to address this by enabling studios to create production tracking processes unique to their studio quickly and easily. I'll show you that in a bit. It can help automate repetitive tasks, as Vitaly mentioned in the beginning. It can, I mean, let's say that you have a task that you're doing daily, weekly, or monthly, or whatever frequency you can think of. I mean, if it is a repetitive task, you can easily solve that with actions, I would say. But it can also be, of course, adding functionality to the interface, like generating reports. If you have a report that let's say that you need to follow up on some tasks, statuses, or asset statuses, or so on, then you can create a report and make that available from inside the Ftrack interface. But it can also be, of course, editing metadata. If we don't support that, of course, then you can add that sort of functionality. It can be about importing or exporting data, and so on. Those are just examples. I mean, transferring files from one location to another is another example. Cascading status changes. As you can see here, infinite number of possibilities that can be utilized, and just to help add that extra functionality that you need, just to increase the efficiency of your workflow. So what do you need? You just need a text editor, simple text editor. Basic Python knowledge, you'll see that also in a bit when we go over some code. And an Ftrack Studio subscription. This is all you need to get started or to create your own actions. Also, before we dive in, I'd like to also say something about how an action can be launched. And when I say launched in this case, I mean how you can start the action, basically, not how the end user in the web interface or in the Connect application can launch the action. I mean how you can start it and make it available to your users, because this can be different depending on the situation. You can either, I mean, I would recommend during developments to just use the terminal of your choice. That's also something I will show you in a bit, just to test the code, because that's the easiest, the most straightforward way of seeing any errors or anything else that doesn't work with your action. Then that will just show up in the terminal, and this can easily be hidden if you're doing it from the Connect application, for example. This is also something that I will point out later on. So it can look basically something like this. This is just my terminal that I have been using that I will be using during the webinar, but also what I have been using to create those examples that I will show you during the webinar. So I just used the Python interpreter in the terminal and just passed in the Python file to it and launched the actions that way. Also in production, just to say something about that, you can run, or it's recommended that you run Python processes as a daemon on a separate machine. I mean, if you run it on your own machine, it will just it won't be available anymore if you, let's say that you log out of your computer, or if you quit the computer, shut it down, then it won't be available. So it's definitely recommended, of course, to run it on a separate machine, either using a process control system like Supervisor, for example, to make sure that it is always running, and that it can also report back to you if it's not running, if it has any problems or so. Then you that is one way of solving it. Using a process control system. What I will get back to towards the end of the webinar is a way to use our desktop application Ftrack Connect to launch the action or make it available to your users, because Connect can take care of it as well. I'll get back to that also. I think before I'll leave this slide, also I'll also take the opportunity to just explain what an action is technically. As you have already understood from what I have been telling you so far, an action is just pure Python code that's executed from the web interface or from the Connect app. It also builds, what's good to know about is that it's also built on top of the events framework that is available in the Ftrack API. So that's also something that I was showing you in a second, that you will actually be under the hood, so to speak. You'll actually be registering your action, and you'll be publishing events and so on onto the Event Hub, which is, I mean, the Event Hub is what is behind, basically what is running behind the web interface as well, in the web browser. So in its simplest form, I want to just start off with some code, and those I think it says 11 lines of code here, but it's just some space around, so it's seven lines of code, right, to create an action that will show up in the web interface and be available to your users. So I'll explain it line by line, and this is basically what it represents in the web interface. This code, as you can see, it says my webinar action is what will be the title of the action in the web interface. But going through it line by line, An action is basically a Python class. I would recommend you, and now, I mean, this is a getting started session with action, so I would recommend you to start off with our base class that we are providing. I'll provide a link towards the end of the webinar as well to that repository that I have been using to create those examples here, and that I also recommend you to take a look at. So instead of actually, as I just mentioned, registering and publishing in events and so on, doing it on that low level, you can just use the base action to more quickly get started with the concept. It simplifies configurations of the action and also converts the events that are emitted from the server to a more Pythonic data representation, basically. So that's just a small tip that I would like to mention. The label, as I just mentioned, actually the label is what will be visible to the end user in the web interface or in the Connect application. The identifier is also something that is required. If I didn't say that, the label and the identifier are both required attributes or required properties of the class. So you'll need to specify those to make this a valid action, basically. So the identifier is what is being used on the event hub, basically, so that Ftrack knows which action that was launched and which was discovered and so on. I'll be talking about that in just a second. What that means, but it's just a way for us, or for the Ftrack instance, to know what action was launched and so on. So you need to specify that in this type, in this form that I have in this example. The next method here actually is the discover method. And here it's just returning true, as you can see, which just means that it will always show up for everyone on your instance. But this is the place where you can control basically who should see this action or who should be able to access it. So, I mean, should it be available under certain conditions or circumstances only? Like when a user with a specific permission accesses it, let's say that only this action should be available to project managers using that role or having that role, or only be available for system administrators, for example, then you can control that here so that it only appears for those types of users, basically. And then another example that I will also be showing you on one of the coming slides here is that you can detect what is actually coming in here in the entities, what's passed in through the entities here. So you can detect what type of entity they selected, for example, in the web interface, how many items they selected. But we'll take a look at that. This is all controlled by the discover method. So, I mean, the action doesn't make any sense without having that. Same goes for the launch method, which is just as it says here. But what should happen when the launch, when the action is being launched, when it's being clicked in the user interface, or when it's being clicked in the Connect application? What should happen on the server side or on the backend, basically. Now it's just returning true. Yes, that's a very simple example again, but that just means that it will just present a very simple message to the user saying like, this action, my webinar action was executed, basically. This is just what you need to create your action. There is, I mean, there are other things happening actually behind the scenes here if you're not using the base action, as I mentioned in the beginning. But this is what you need if you want to get started quickly. Close look at the sorry at the discover method. So as I just mentioned, you can detect basically and react differently depending on what is coming into the action to the discover method. In this case, if I highlight those two rows here, I'm just looking at the length of that array, because this is an array that is passed in. And in this case, if it's not one, and if it doesn't have a length of 1, then it's just returned, which just means that it won't show up in the web interface unless it's only one single item selected in the web interface. The next few rows here, or lines, is just checking the type of entity that was selected, because I mean, if at this point here we know that it should only be one entity, right? That is passed to the action, because otherwise this would have returned already up here, right? So now we're checking what it is that was selected, and if the entity type is not of ACID version, if the type is not an ACID version, then it won't also return. So this code just means that it will only show up for one single version in the web interface, and this is what this screenshot what this shows basically. Here is the versions page behind this dialog here. And I've only selected one version on this page, and that made it show up in the actions dialog. If I would have selected 2 versions, it wouldn't have shown up. So I think that makes sense, right? And again, I return true at the end just to make sure that something is actually happening, that something is showing up. Returning false would just mean that it won't show up. So a closer look at the launch method, which is just the second method that is required in the base class, or when you are creating it from base class. So instead of just returning true, which will just result in a very simple message appearing from the top in the web interface, you can change it slightly to instead return an object, a Python object here, as you can see. It's and when returning it as an object, you will need to specify a success criteria or just a success element here. So it just says true, which will just result in that message appearing from the top. What I'd like to point out here before we continue is that this type of message that is actually giving some sort of feedback to the user, because I mean, a message appearing from the top does actually say something to the user, right? It tells the user about some progress or whatever it can be. An action doesn't need to actually tell the user about anything, right? It can just run some code and that's it. But that would probably not be the best user experience if not providing any feedback or anything back to the user. So this is why this is the reason, yes, why the type that is set to message here is this is one sort type of user interface. We will look deeper into some different user interfaces in a short while, and I'll show you some different types of UIs basically. But in this case, we will just change the default message to just execute it successfully, and it looks something like this in the web interface. You have probably seen this type of message before in the Ftrack UI that we are using internally to give feedback to the user. I mean, let's say if a user has saved some items or some changes to some items in the tasks spreadsheet, we're using this to give some feedback. And this is also a way for you to provide some feedback to the user about the progress, for example, or that it was successfully executed, like in this case. I already mentioned it quickly before, but you can also change that very easily to detect a number of entities that were selected. So here I selected 3 entities, for example, in this case, or in this example. And we will be looking at this in just a short demo. And those 2 examples just covers what I've just went over. So here I'm showing you first where the actions dialog can be opened. And it's in the top of the side panel, and it's in the context menu when right-clicking the spreadsheet, the task spreadsheet in this case. When clicking it, it will present you all the actions that are available. As you can see here, some of them are built in or actually bundled with the Connect application. The Adobe applications, for example, those are available or made available through the Connect application. But you can also, as you can see here, add your own. Here's my webinar action, and this is the just few lines of code that I showed you earlier during or in the beginning of the webinar. This will result in this icon in the actions dialog. And here you can also see that they are grouped depending on how frequently you have been using them, basically. I mean, many of our customers are having lots of actions, and this helps them to find them faster, basically. Instead of scrolling through a long list of actions, you will always have those that you are using frequently in the top of the dialog. So they are grouped together. And you can just launch it by clicking it in this dialog. And as you can see here, it results in this message I just showed you on the previous slide. So the second example, just a very simple example of when selecting a few items in the spreadsheet. I'd like to say that this also can be accomplished or launched from the version spreadsheet, of course. So if you're selecting a bunch of versions, you can launch it the same way by right-clicking. And here is this example I just showed you. So going back to the slides and talking a bit more about the different user interfaces that are available. There are different response types that can return back from the launch method. It is the message that is appearing from the top, as you have already seen a few times now. There's also a way to launch a widget. So you're just basically, instead of writing type message, you add type widget, and that will allow you to show a custom web page of any type. I would say it could be an internal wiki, for example, or an internal company page of some sort. It could be any sort of web widget, basically, that can be displayed inside of the actions dialog, basically. Later on during the webinar, I will show you an example of how that can look like, where we have been using some external libraries to create a web page appearing inside of the Ftrack actions dialog, or in the Ftrack web as a web widget, basically. But I would say the most traditional way of using actions that we have had since, almost since the implementation of this feature is the form type, which just allows you to create a predefined set of form fields, basically, or form elements to gather feedback. There are many different use cases, and the elements available are among others text fields, text areas that just allow you to enter text into the action and save that to the database and add it add it as a description to an asset, for example, or something like that. It can be about numbers, it can be about booleans, yes, true, false values, tick boxes, dates, hidden fields and enumerators and so on. Most of the UI elements that we're using actually in Ftrack are available in the actions to choose from, basically, to build your own form in the actions interface. This is just a very simple example. Of course, might not always make sense to just ask for the name, but just as an example of what you can do, just add a text field and ask the user for the name, for example. And in a very simple form, this is the code that is required for this to work. If we take a look at what's on the left-hand side first, in the launch method, I've just added an if clause. Yes, that is looking for the values in the event data. So if when launching the action, if values doesn't exist in the event data, it will just pass on, right? So nothing will happen. But if it exists, it will return again what you have seen before. It will return a message back to the user. Just say hi, and yes, a success true value there. On the right hand side, I also like to just point out here what is required for the interface to show up, right? So you will just need, when using the base class, again, it works a little bit different when not using the base class. I've been talking a bit about now during the webinar, but when using the base class, you just need to specify an interface method, and that's it, basically, and return an array of form elements that you want to present back to the user. So it's just a few lines of code to create that form that you need to gather the feedback, or to gather some information from the user, whatever information it can be. In this case, I just have a text field, as you saw in the screenshot, and just a simple label asking for the name. And as you can see here, I have also, this is also required for the text field in this case. So the Python code or your action actually can retrieve that name that they entered, right? So because if we look again on the left hand side, you can see that it looks for the name value, right, in the values that are passed in, and this is essentially what I'm looking for here, the name property of the text field. So if we take a quick look at a simple demo again, and what happens. So here I'm just launching it again from the context menu, and my webinar action again available in the actions dialog. And here you can see it live. Just added a simple text field, and this is it basically. I would say this is around 10-15 lines of code to create this. And this is all what you need to come up with that interface. I know that you can think of many different other scenarios here, basically, where this can come in handy, the Ftrack user interfaces. And this is just a very simple example that I hope makes sense during this getting started session. So next. There are ways to, other ways. If you don't want to trigger an action, want a user to trigger an action, like from the context menu or from the side panel or from somewhere else in the interface, you can also automatically trigger an action user interface when something's happening on the Ftrack instance. I have a few examples here that I would like to highlight. Just it could, a use case is actually that it could be when someone is approving a version, if they also want to approve the task that the version is associated with. This is not always the case, so this is not something that we have built into Ftrack. We have instead let each user or customer add it to their instance, and this is one way of doing that, to add that type of functionality to the Ftrack instance. But that's one example. Another one is if the user wants to generate a folder on disk when a new shot or other type of entity has been created. It can be, just to make sure that the folder structure is actually available or represented on disk. you can make sure that it's actually happening automatically or when running an action through the interface. It could also be about warnings, of course, that a user is trying to log time to a project that is not active because it has ended, basically. It has wrapped up, and they should probably not log time to it then. Then you can just give a warning that this they have probably just followed the wrong link or an invalid link or an outdated link and try to log time to that task. So that's something also that can be added on to the interface or to the instance. And how to accomplish this, it's a little bit different from using the base class that I showed you in the beginning, or have been talking about so far, actually. Here it's more about, it's all about publishing an event onto the event hub. And the event is created or structured like this. I'm using the trigger user interface topic, just to say to the event hub that you want to trigger a user interface, basically. Simple as that. In my example here, I will be presenting a form to the user, just consisting of a label with a question, basically. Also a very simple example, but you could actually, if you want to automatically just present a message appearing from top, or present a widget with a custom web page, then you can do that by just entering type widget or type message on this line here, line number 10. The action identifier, again, here that comes in just so that if you recall from the base class, I showed you the label and the identifier were those required attributes that were needed on the base class to be a valid class, basically. So here is the same goes here, basically, that the event hub needs to know what this is, basically, what type of event is this, and what can I tie it to, basically. So we know where to publish it and where to register it, and with what name, basically. And that is done on that line. So the items configuration, that is the same items configuration or array list that I showed you earlier. Yes, it can be several or multiple different form elements asking the user for more information, for example, or more feedback, or whatever it can be. You can set the title, of course, of the dialog, but you can also, new in the latest version of Ftrack, I think this was released in Ftrack 4.5, is that you can also set the dimension, the size, basically, of the windows. So you can set the height and the width of it if you want to just present, use a small area, or just a limited area of the screen or something like that. You can control that. I think that's it. I'll show you a quick demo here as well, just to just point out here. Here I'm looking at the asset version in the side panel, which is in pending review. And when I'm now putting this into approved, this will present a custom interface or a custom user interface, basically, to the user, with just a simple question if they also want to approve the version, the task that this version was published to. It can, of course, be the other way around, or it can be something else. It could actually be like, when this version now is approved, you probably may want to move the asset files or the files associated with this version to a different folder somewhere, or you wanted to add it to the render queue, or whatever you can think of. This is all possible to accomplish here, or control from the action dialog. And when clicking submit, this means that clicking submit means that it will launch or run the code in the launch method. And in this case, I just presented a simple message back to the user, but it could actually have done something meaningful there, of course. If you were just about to close the dialogue, that would have meant or resulted in the cancel action, basically. So submitting it means yes, and the closing the dialogue means no, basically, in that case. And this is how that is working, right? Cool. I just want to also quickly show you a custom widget. I mentioned it earlier during the webinar that I wanted to just give you an example of how it can look like. But this can, of course, as I mentioned before, it can be an internal wiki, for example, or some other sort of company page. So here I'm showing you the asset report, which is just, as you can see here, it's just taking out the whole actions dialogue with, it even removed the submit button, as you can see here. It's taking up the whole space of the dialogue, and it is presenting this web page. I think this, yes, in this example, this specific example, this is running on my local host, and it's just presenting those. I think it was built with React and some material UI components, similar to the ones that we are using in Overview, for example. And you can just, yeah, of course, enter a name. You can create toggle boxes or checklists or whatever you need on your custom web page. And in this case, this just will a way to download a report, basically, of the assets on that instance. So let's see here if I can go back to the slides again. And just also mention that you can run action as a plugin to connect. I know that I mentioned in the beginning, instead of just while developing using a terminal, like you can see in this spreadsheet, you can, by just going to the Ftrack menu when having Ftrack Connect launched. As you can see here, this is just on my computer, but it looks similar on a Windows or a Linux machine. You have it in the menu bar or in the taskbar. If you click the Ftrack icon and select Open Plugin Directory, you will be taken to the folder or directory where the plugins in Ftrack Connect are stored, or basically where Ftrack Connect will scan for plugins that you have added. So if you want to move it from your terminal into Ftrack Connect, it's just a matter of going to that folder. You can see it's normally named Ftrack Connect plugins, and in that folder, you have to create a new folder for your action. I've just named it example action in this case, and in that folder, you need to create two different folders or directories. One for the action and one that is called hook, which is actually the folder that Connect is scanning for new plugins, or for the Python file in this case. And when it finds it, it will compile it and it will present it to the user automatically without you doing anything, basically. This is, of course, very useful when let's say, having Ftrack Connect shared on a local storage within, within your facilities to your users. And when they are launching Ftrack Connect, they will have it automatically show up, or when you launch it, for that matter, they will automatically have it show up in their Ftrack web interface. Just as a little bonus now towards the end of the webinar, I'd like also to let you know, you probably noticed it in the previous demo clip that I showed you, but you can also add an icon to your actions to quicker find them, basically, or make them more personalized, maybe. Depends on the purpose and the use case, of course. But here I've just added a custom icon to my webinar action. And it's just a matter of adding next to the label and the identifier in the base class, just add another line called icon, and then specify the URL to your image file, and that will be presented as the icon in the Actions dialog and in the Ftrack Connect application. Now, before we wrap this up, I'd also like to take the opportunity to mention about the professional services team and the custom development projects that we are doing. It's a fairly new team that we've formed in Ftrack that will take on all sorts, I would say, types of technical implementations and customizations of Ftrack. As you can see here, this is just a typical, just an example of a customer life cycle where the professional services projects are coming in during the in-life phase, basically, for a customer. And this just means that if you don't have the resources needed, you don't have the developer that can take on this or help you create those actions, we are here to help you to do that. Basically, as I've been talking about during this webinar, mostly it can be about Ftrack actions, it can be about automations of the pipeline, and that's something that we can help you out with. All, of course, is depending on the scope and the timeline and time frame and so on, but it's just to reach out to sales@ftrack.com to request or with your request, and we would love to hear from you about what we can do for you in terms of custom development. I'd also like to just mention a few useful links and resources. An introduction to actions is available on our website. You have the base class documentation I've been using, or basically you created using the, I used it to create my examples during this webinar. The documentation is available on this link. The repository URL also available here is mentioned in the documentation, of course, as well. Code snippets and examples, some example actions that you can, just for your for some inspiration, they are available on our Bitbucket account on this link. And the actions documentation is also very helpful in the knowledge base that we have over at help.ftrack.com. You don't need to, of course, write all those URLs down. We'll share those with you after the webinar, and also this webinar will be available as a recording, and they will be available in that recording, of course. I think that's it. So I'm ready for some questions, and we'll see.
So
let's come in.
Shall I read these out? Yeah. So here's one from Mark. How would you approach a solution for resolving and opening a specific path on the file server?
For resolving and opening a specific path. I would, I mean, it's quite a specific question actually for a specific use case, but I would, I mean, there is a resolver service. This is probably, I haven't mentioned it during the webinar so far, but there is a resolver service running on your Ftrack instance. This should be on both the cloud, in the cloud hosted environment and on the local hosted environment. But there is a service that we're using to resolve URLs, just to make sure that they are available and that Ftrack can access them. This can be used, of course, and we can take a look at that if you need any help with that. But with opening a specific path, I would actually try to look at how that is done within the Connect application. Now I have very limited information here and no details really, but you should be able to go into, I mean, since the Ftrack Connect application is open source, you can go into the source code and look at how we are doing that, how we are resolving the paths, and how we make sure that they are accessible. If you are, just as a quick example, if you are looking at the components on an asset version in the Ftrack web interface, you should be able to see that they are turning from red to white in color when accessing that asset version, and that is basically the resolver service that is trying to find the file for you and just making sure that it is available. I mean, what I also wanted to add to the Connect, what I just said about Connect, is that inside the Connect package, there is a file, I think it's called resolver.py, that is using this approach, basically how that is actually connecting to the Event Hub and doing all of this resolving. I hope that helps. If it doesn't, just reach out, please reach out to me or to support, and we can help you.
Awesome. Okay, second question is from Chris. I just added a star, so I guess I'll add that to the question. How would you recommend managing listener trigger actions? For example, if I have a listener waiting for a type of task to set to complete, so I can say it's outgoing link task to ready to start. And then more specifically, services processes to manage task queues so that the actions trigger as quickly as possible across all projects.
I mean, how you should manage it. Yeah, I would say I would have done that through that process control system I mentioned before. I mean, set to complete. I just need to read the question again. If I have listener waiting for type of task set to complete, so I can set the link to it. It's actually, from what I understand from the question, it's actually very simple to set that up. But to have it, I would have added it to a process control system like Supervisor that I talked about before, just to make sure that it's always running, and from there it should just be able to just wait for changes to happen. I guess this is not in a terminal that I've been showing you during development, but you will need to add the session event hub wait command. I'm not sure exactly what that, if you have started to create that action or not, but this is also something that we can more specifically look into if you don't find a way to manage that. And we can also, of course, run it through the development team if I need any recommendations on that, how that should be done. I hope that helps.
Thank you. And here's another one from Jay. How can I ensure my custom actions or event triggers will be available to artists working remotely or outside of our studio network? Do I have to install them do I have to get them to install Ftrack Connect and copy the Python scripts? Or is there an easier non-technical way? So I think this is a question about deploying custom actions to other artists. Yeah.
So first, you don't need to get them to install Ftrack Connect. Actually, you should not need to do that, at least. But I mean, if they can access web interface, and I mean, the action is running somewhere, the action is actually running towards your machine or against your machine, connected to your machine, to your instance, then to your Ftrack instance, I mean, then it should show up as any action. I mean, they are still able to use actions as if they would have been inside your premises or on your premises, basically within your facility. So they don't need to use Connect for that, as long as you, of course, have given them sort of access in the Python code, right? You should not have restricted it in any way, of course. That is just a matter of making sure that it runs towards the machine or on the Ftrack instance, basically, that is connected. Was there another question? Second question there? Do I have to get them installed and copy the Python today? To answer yes, if it's an easy, non-technical way. Well, I think I did actually cover it with the Connect application. I think that's fine. If it doesn't make sense, my answer there, just reach out and we'll take a closer look at your situation or your scenario. Cool. Do you have any other questions?
So here's one that came in directly on the email. How much of a resource is needed to add custom actions?
Yeah, it's a quite specific question. Actually, it depends on your resources, of course, but you or someone you know need to have a basic Python knowledge, of course, in order to create and add actions to your Ftrack instance or Ftrack workspace. That is why we also have added that to our portfolio in the professional services team, right? To be able to help out with things like this for those that doesn't have the required resources, but still wants to tailor their workflows or their processes. I mean, this is all about because the actions are Python code, and it's as simple as that. Even if it's very easy to get started with, I can definitely see that it's something that not everyone can take on. It all depends on the experience and the knowledge. So yeah, that's it. Anything else, Vitaly?
So yeah, there's just two more questions here that came to my inbox. So one is, can a custom widget interact with the Ftrack interface itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as you probably saw, I mean, yeah, I showed you a custom implementation with a React React web page and with some material UI elements. I mean, the web page itself can actually trigger events that can navigate the user to a different module or to, I think it's possible to show the side panel as well. So the side panel will slide in and let the user get some more information about a specific item or whatever it can be. But it can also actually close the dialogue itself. So you can, let's say that you have created, let's say, a report like what I did with the asset report. When actually clicking that button, you can make sure that the user gets the file, or that the file is being downloaded to the computer. But you can also then, after that action, also close the dialogue, which probably makes sense in that case, and which is what you wanted to do, probably.
Cool. And I guess the last question that we have, and this one I suppose loads of people want to know, where can I share my own actions with other users?
Yeah, I mean, we have various actions shared by our community on the Ftrack forum. So you can take a look at forum.ftrack.com and get involved with any action related questions. I think that's the best place to go, I would say. But you can also, of course, what I just mentioned on the previous slide, the code snippets and examples. I mean, that's not a place to share actions, but still a place to find inspiration and to find examples of some specific cases that we have made available to everyone. So those are available on our Bitbucket account.
Cool. And all those links are actually in the Zoom webinar chat window. So if anyone wants to copy and paste those onto their notes or somewhere on their desktop, then they're there for you now.
Yeah, that's great.
Matthias, thanks, man. Thanks. What a great presentation. I hope it was useful for everyone.
My pleasure.
We do have some more webinars coming up soon. Please visit ftrack.com/webinars. And as last time, I will ask again, to increase the value of our future webinars, we're going to send out a mini survey. Please share your thoughts with us. And yeah, from the whole team at Ftrack, we appreciate you spending your time with us. I hope you took something away from this session. Thank you so much for attending, and have a great week.
Thank you so much.